The emergence of science and evidence has changed everything for the nutrition and fitness landscape. We have strategies and knowledge that are based on actual fact, not just belief or dogma, and it's revolutionized the entire industry, delivering consistent and reliable approaches for both coaches and clients. But, and this is a big but, there have been several times where science has actually failed nutrition coaches. And today I'm going to show you all 5, leaving the big one, the one that many coaches have been led to believe, literally ruining their clients' results before they even start until last. So stay tuned for that, but let's dive into it. I'm Dr. Mark Morris, a doctor in human nutrition and a full-time nutrition coach. And today I'm giving you the facts about where science has failed nutrition coaches. Number 5, not all evidence is created equal. Just because something is studied or published doesn't mean it's going to change what you do as a nutrition coach. And we're seeing this more and more in the social media landscape. Check this out.
The first thing you want to do when you wake up is run at a full sprint, staring directly at the sun. This will help reset your Tarkanian rhythm and regenerating your Heineken levels. I would recommend running towards a body of water, preferably salt water. Meta-analyses have concluded that human contact between the skin of a human's fingers and a live great white shark is critical for your Schmugenflugen.
We're starting to see this stuff all the time. Someone shares the results of a study, showing something obscure has a huge impact on nutrition or a result, but they don't actually mention that the study was done on animals or it wasn't well controlled, or it's just flat out misinterpreted. And this is important because not all scientific evidence is created equal. Some has more weight than others and needs to be taken more seriously. Some scientific evidence has more weight than others depending on how the study was actually designed. Just like we have a hierarchy for nutrition and what matters most in the actual context, we have a hierarchy of evidence too. And it looks something like this. Opinions and anecdote aren't rated very highly, but different types of experiments, depending on how they were conducted, are going to be stronger in terms of what they reveal and what they tell you. All scientific data is good, but it all has its place. And for a lot of this stuff, the stuff that you see in social media clips, it's really just hypothesis generating. It's something that's somewhat interesting, but should be studied further. It doesn't tell you much, and it definitely shouldn't change what you do with your own nutrition or your client's nutrition. It should be just a piece of the puzzle and not something that changes everything you do with your own training or nutrition. When I was in grad school, there was almost this running joke. When you finished an experiment or a paper that you were writing, you would always conclude with more research needs to be done or we need more data. And that's because a lot of the stuff that you learn, it doesn't tell you all that much. It just adds to the actual puzzle. And fast forward to my career now as an actual nutrition coach working with people, it's important to stay up to date with the research. But in reality, in most cases, new information, it just adds to what we already know in supplements with it. It's not groundbreaking. It's not going to change everything you do with clients. And if it does, you probably don't have a very strong base to pull from to begin with. So when you're looking through scientific evidence, you need to understand that not all of this evidence or stuff that's published, it's not all created equal, especially if you're just looking for stuff that confirms what you already believe. Which brings me to point number 4, confirmation bias. If this is a new concept for you, here's what you need to know about confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to interpret new evidence as a confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. You're looking for stuff to specifically tell you what you already know, which can be really dangerous if you have some polarizing views on nutrition and health. And this can be really misleading in the scientific process, because if you're looking for evidence to support something, chances are that you'll find it. And we see this all the time when it comes to cherry picking specific results of scientific studies. You take one fact or finding and only tell part of the story to fit your narrative without really seeing how it fits into the bigger picture. And I personally see this all the time, especially since starting my YouTube channel. When I do videos on the keto diet or the carnivore diet or paleo diet, I can see it all the time in the comments. Who are you to say this thing doesn't work? Haven't you read any of Dr. So-and-so or this doctor? I get those comments all the time, and that's because I'm saying things that disagree with those people's beliefs. And they're pointing me in the direction of someone else that has conflicting views that I should read more about, which is fine. I don't know everything, and admittedly, I'm the first one to say that. But a lot of times I'm being pushed content from authors and coaches and scientists, doctors that are putting out a very one-sided view of the scientific evidence when it comes to nutrition. And it all comes back to cherry picking data and looking for stuff that confirms what they know. You don't have to look very hard in the scientific evidence to confirm something that may or may not be true, especially if you're cherry picking. And here's the saddest part of this entire scenario. In these comments of, the people that are disagreeing with me, they will say, well, I did keto and I had this great result. result. What do you say about that? It completely changed my life. First of all, that's amazing. Kudos to you for doing something to improve your health. I think that is fantastic, and I sincerely mean that. But what a lot of people don't understand about the scientific process is that you can have specific scientific articles or things being published that say one thing, but it doesn't tell you the entire picture. And you might get a result that's fantastic, but it's actually in spite of what you did, not because of it. And that's why it's so important to look at the entire picture and judge it based on that, so you get a better sense of what are the underlying scientific principles at play, and not just look for stuff that confirms what you already know or believe. Which brings me to my next point, point number 3. Not everything in science can be applied, even not yet sometimes. One of the huge breakthroughs in the nutrition coaching space was an individualized approach to nutrition, putting more of the onus on the actual client. And this happened in the years between 2000 and 2015. And as someone that has studied nutrition and dietetics for a long period of time, I can tell you firsthand that it was really tough for people to track what they eat given the technology before that time. So it just didn't happen. And most nutrition counseling was done by the nutritionist taking a look at what someone was eating and developing the requirements and setting them up on a personalized meal plan, which in most cases had really low adherence because it's really hard to follow something explicitly. You could only really track what you ate and analyze the nutrients if you had access to a university-based lab, where if you had some of the clunky computer-based programs to track what you eat and log it that way. This was typically reserved for people in university settings, not the consumer. So it just wasn't done until the emergence of phone-based tracking apps. And when this started to become more popular, everything changed, because now the nutrition professional just didn't tell those people explicitly what to eat. They could teach them how to eat. And it was all due to the emergence of technology. Sometimes we know things and understand things and principles, but they just can't be applied yet. The technology hasn't caught up, or we just don't know how to do it yet. Here's another example of this, of something I came across in the last week. It isn't as positive, but check this out.
In America, 1 in 3 women are diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime, and for men, 1 in 2. Go to cdc.gov and you want to fact check that. It's on there right now. Cancer is everywhere in America. Dr. Thomas Seyfried from Boston College has said in his research that if you completed a 7-day water fast once a year, you would reduce your risk of any cancer by 95% because of this autophagy process. How empowering is that? We have control here.
Wow. Have you done a 7-day fast?
I did a 5-day water fast, and I achieved what's called maximum autophagy, which is what he was referring to.
Okay, not speaking to the actual cancer rates here. I don't know if that specific figure or statistic is true, but that doesn't really matter. The part I want to hone in on here isn't so much the biohacker sunglasses or even the dubious research or its interpretations. It's what he's actually saying about doing a 7-day water fast. He talks about this being an empowering thing because you can control your risk of cancer, but he also mentions that he actually hasn't been able to do it. He's never done it. And that's because in some situations, this could be true. And keep in mind, I don't even know if that scientific reference of 7 days fasting is true. I have a feeling it isn't. But even if it is, literally, you can't apply it. And most people aren't going to apply it, which means that not all scientific data or approaches or strategies can be applied. A huge part of my scientific-based nutrition coaching practice are what are the things that my clients can actually do? What can they actually apply to get results? It isn't always going to be the things that are found in scientific studies. The next thing I want to talk about here is number 2, dismissing anecdote. The one thing about the scientific process is that it can be a little negative. In essence, when you're trying to prove a hypothesis, you're actually trying to prove it wrong. That's how science was founded. But when you're constantly trying to prove things wrong, it can make you, as the scientist or the coach, a little bit cynical. It tends to show us what doesn't matter instead of what does matter. And here's the deal, just because there isn't evidence to support something doesn't always make it true. It just may mean that we haven't studied it in the right way yet. And sometimes it's just not actually feasible to study. So just because there isn't scientific evidence for something doesn't mean that it's not meaningful or worthwhile. And this is where anecdote comes in. Of course, it doesn't rate very high when we talk about the hierarchy of evidence, but it doesn't mean that it's meaningless. So if you have a personal experience where you tried something and it worked and it was helpful, then that's great. Then that adds to the evidence around what you or potentially a client should be doing moving forward. Just because it hasn't been studied doesn't mean it's not a real thing. And this is where anecdote comes in very, very well. Actually, in my PhD research, we were doing a study on a newly diagnosed patient population. It was going to be super well controlled. And because of that, we were going to get really good high quality information on this patient population. But we started recruiting these patients and it started off really slowly. And then it continued on really slowly. We couldn't find these people. And that's because although being really specific can be helpful when you're looking at data, it doesn't always make it feasible. How do I want to put this? Some things don't exist not because they're not wrong, but just because you can't actually do them. And when this happens, lower level evidence actually fills that gap. And here's the last point, and it's the most important one because I see it all the time and time again. And it's comparing what actually happens in the textbooks versus what happens in the real world. We're talking about number one, theoretical versus actual. Let me know if this story sounds familiar. You've taken a basic level nutrition certification and you have a pretty good idea of what you're doing. You understand the science of nutrition. And you know that in order to tell people how much they should be eating, you need to get a better sense of how much energy they're burning. So you just start to determine their maintenance calories. You use a calculation like the Harris-Benedict equation or the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, and you punch in all of their information. And it spits out a number that you consider quite high. You pass it along to the client and start to tell them to eat that many calories based on what the recommendation was. And even if you put them in a modest deficit based on that and they want to lose weight, they start doing it and they say that's way too much food. I can't possibly eat this much, but I trust you as my coach, so I'm going to do it. And they start gaining weight. Now, obviously they're not happy with you, but you trusted the textbook and the science makes sense, right? They should be able to do this. You calculated their maintenance calories, you took some food off, they should be losing weight, but it's not happening. And this is because there is a big difference between what actually happens in the textbook and what should be true and what happens in the real world. And we see this all the time with calorie intake, which people should be able to do and what they're actually doing, they're not the same thing. And the difference between these two things are what are gonna make or break your client's results. This is the exact situation that Dr. Mark Method's student Logan found himself in when he first started his nutrition coaching business. And he started working with people and putting them on the calories that he thought he should be based on the textbook calculations. I taught him a slightly different way in terms of getting a bit closer to what they're actually doing and basing some numbers based on that, as well as the textbook calculations. In those first clients that he started with that were frustrated that they were moving in the wrong direction, they finally started to see results. And that's because what's actually happening here, it factors in some underreporting and what they're actually doing as opposed to what you think they should be doing. These are apples and oranges. They're not the same thing. And if you focus too much on this without applying what is actually happening, you're gonna steer people in the wrong direction. Nutrition coaching is the application of science, and you need to be able to apply it to get clients results. Now here's the deal, guys. The emergence of science in nutrition coaching has changed everything for the better. But there are still some scenarios where it misleads us as nutrition coaches. And the scientific process at times can make you feel a little cynical, especially if it's constantly disproving new things. But what it does do a really good job at is revealing principles, universal truths that are fact, that matter no matter what. And you need to focus on those as we learn new things. So as a nutrition coach, here's what you need to do. Don't focus on being quote unquote right, focus on being helpful. Don't focus on being right, focus on getting it right, which means helping the people that you serve. Now, as great as all those tips are, if you're really serious about starting a nutrition coaching business, the next thing I'm gonna have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. If you like this video, you're gonna love this one. I'm gonna show you the one thing that shocked the nutrition world. You're not gonna wanna miss it, so check it out now and I'll see you in the next video.